Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Unstoppable. It's the Unstoppable Podcast. I'm your host, Ralph Grace Jr. So glad to have you guys here, man. Every week, I say you guys could be listening to anyone else, but you chose to listen to this podcast. Or watch it or wherever you are. And thank you for being here. Today's guest, this week's guest, his name is Steve Dana. He is the CEO, the president, the chief operating officer of Protection from Abuse Services. Hey man, how you doing?
I'm good, brother. How are you?
Man, it's so good to see you, man. You've been out of we've been out of touch for a little while, man, but it's good to see you, man.
Living in two countries, so
Good stuff, good stuff, man. I thank you for being on the program. And man, safety is a big issue. Before we even get started, man, why don't you tell this audience a little bit about what you do?
well, it's coming up on 3 decades now. I've been involved in risk management, close protection, security in general. And in 2015, I decided to pivot and take my experience, my trade craft, and really dedicate myself to the people that need it the most. And I founded the nonprofit charitable organization called Protection from Abuse. And we provide safety and security programs and guidance and services to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking, and under our federal grant, any other violent crime. So we get involved in routinely become involved in gang violence with victims receiving threats, gang-associated threats, and all sorts of other heinous stuff.
Yeah.
Where people are in danger. So, and
now you said you started a background of personal bodyguard, am I right? Or you were
protecting? But my career, throughout my career, I did that kind of work more as a sideline. Personality, personal perspective. I never enjoyed babysitting executives or babysitting celebrities. The risk taker in me and the testosterone poisoning that I had much of my life. I wanted to be in risky situations. So I never really enjoyed that. So I only pursued that. I always kept an agency and I picked up that work where I could. But a lot of my career was spent managing litigation and risk management.
A few things I want to ask you. I know that I could be wrong if I'm saying this. You primarily now have services that kind of focus on women, correct? Females or males too?
Typically the individuals that will reach out to us are women, but domestic violence affects everyone. And sure. When we talk about running a charity and providing services to the public, there's a lot of attention given to so-called underserved populations. And there are many of them, many different types of underserved populations. But with respect to domestic violence in particular, men are an underserved population. Men and women, despite public perception, they abuse roughly equally. Men, when it's violent, tend to be more severe, but men and women suffer from abuse roughly equally in general. So, men are an underserved population when it comes to domestic violence, but they rarely come forward because, quite frankly, most of the services are targeted for and more welcoming to women. So I have, as the leader of the organization, I've tried to move away from gender. Okay. And I think in terms of individuals in need, individuals being abused or victimized and in need of safety services.
Okay. Let's get right into it, man. I'd like for my audience to try to ask some stuff they would ask. What are some of the first signs that I could be in an abusive relationship, whether it's romantic or whether it's a friendship? What are some of the signs when you give these seminars throughout the globe, throughout the world? Because somebody listening may be involved in something and it might think it's weird, but not really abusive yet. But we know if this continues, it could turn into something abusive. What are some of the first signs?
Wow, that's a load. There's many different signs. Some very obvious, ranging to things that are very subtle. So obviously, violence of any kind, right, is unacceptable no matter what, right? We all have to keep our hands to ourselves. So violence would be, at that far end of the spectrum. And at the other end of the spectrum, there can be behaviors that are a lot more subtle, particularly, and I say subtle particularly, if you have been acculturated to those type of behaviors in your own family or you're in your own social circles. So while you and I may identify a behavior as abnormal, potentially toxic or abusive, to somebody that's been acculturated to that in their family or their upbringing, they may not recognize that behavior as such. Now, some of those behaviors would be controlling behavior, right? Where somebody's trying to control the activities, the friendships, the family relations, the economics of the household. Sometimes it starts out very subtly, and then oftentimes it becomes very pronounced and obvious. So that would be an early sign: controlling behavior, excessive jealousy. Jealousy is something that we're all capable of, right? Jealousy is a natural human behavior that I think everybody experiences, but like a lot of human behaviors, they exist on a continuum. And although some jealousy is probably normal, extreme jealousy is not, right? We're off on the side of things where they could be toxic. So, and when I think of jealousy, I think a lot of people misinterpret that, and particularly young people, because I hear this, well, he just loves me a lot, right? and jealousy is not love. There's nothing, jealousy is possession, and possession is not love. You love something, you do not possess it, and we do not possess any other human being. So, I would say controlling behavior, jealousy, and there's a whole host of other, different, verbal abuse, name calling, there are a lot of different behaviors that are unhealthy and potentially abusive that occur routinely, that culture has normalized many of them, in fact, that some people won't even recognize them as being toxic or abusive.
What about the new abuse? It's not new, but it's just flaunted now. Financial abuse, right?
Well, that's a major one, right? So when we speak to particularly women, men are particularly breadwinners when you have that traditional dynamic, and it's not the dynamic that's the problem, it's the abuse of that dynamic, right? So a lot of women remain in these situations to the frustration of family and friends because they have sacrificed education, they have sacrificed a career to stay at home and raise children, right? So when I think of protective factors, particularly for women, protective factors against being in this situation, financial independence is a must, right? Financial independence, I don't like to think of it in terms of gender. I like to think of financial independence as something that is a hallmark of adulthood for everybody, is to be financially independent in some way. So financial abuse is really big, and it's a big hurdle for a lot of women to escape a bad situation. They simply don't have the resources to really go anywhere, support their children if they have children, rent a home, buy a car, et cetera, and so forth.
You said something, and it's just so much to talk about when it comes to this abuse thing, but you had said something about cultural appropriations, just like it used to. Are some cultures more lenient or on domestic violence than others? I guess the answer would be yes, but explain that to us. I mean, I don't know if the answer is yes or not. I mean, but are some cultures just easier on domestic violence? Like the woman or the man might say, well, this is part of being in a relationship. I was wrong.
Yeah. That's a fair question. So, without targeting any particular culture, there are cultural ideas about this that do, play into it. Particularly heavily patriarchal type of cultures, you might find some of those attitudes. When I think of it, I try not to to focus on any one culture in particular. I think in terms of individual circumstances. So,
Sure.
your acculturation or different beliefs can arise from interpretations of your religious beliefs, right? Used to weaponize, control over you and ultimately abuse. But it can also be, just your environment. One of the examples I use that's the most powerful way that I can understand it is my experience living in Tamaulipas, Mexico. Now Tamaulipas is a do not travel state on the U.S. State Department list. Do not travel for Americans. I live there. The state is very dangerous, right? So, my last 3 years there, I'm constantly peeling back that onion and constantly shocked by the levels of insecurity and impunity and danger in the country. And when I talk to my wife about it, she just kind of shrugs her shoulders because she doesn't have anything to compare it to. Okay. So while, given my American acculturation, where, we have a strong judicial system, these systems are not perfect, right? But we have a strong judicial system. We generally have good public safety.
Right.
When we have corruption, it's not the norm. It's usually the exception. She does not have anything to compare that to. I do. So I am shocked, and she's not necessarily shocked because that's just life in many parts of Mexico. Yeah. And I think the same applies, if you grew up in an abusive household, you're experiencing these unhealthy dynamics, and a lot of those unhealthy dynamics bleed over to, unhealthy parenting dynamics, right? So when you've been acculturated to that, it seems normal. It feels normal to you. So you might not recognize that in your own relationship when you move on and you grow up and you become an adult or dating as a teenager. They don't recognize.
So here's my question: if I don't complain, is it abuse? You just caught me. If I don't complain, I'm in a different culture. I'm not complaining. You see it with our American eyes as abuse. But if I don't complain, is it abuse?
I think that's a philosophical question.
Yeah, that's why. And man, look, we go way back. So I'll just make my thought out there.
I think it. I think it is. Just because if something is unjust, but you accept it, does that make it less unjust? And I would say the answer to that is no. And I think, that any type of toxic or abusive behavior that, and these type of behaviors in particular stop you from being everything that you can be and, affect people superficially and on very deep levels. And so whether they complain or not, there's a human cost in terms of potential output and human potential and, people being the greatest, version of themselves that they can be. And I don't think you can be that, under those conditions.
Yeah. There's this new kind of abuse. Now, I mentioned financial abuse. There's this new, I guess you might know where I'm going. I'm married 32 years. It's sweet. It's lovely. I could never be single, never do it again, never try to do it again. Hope my wife lives forever. If she goes to glory before I do, I'm just buying, I'll get a dog or a cat or something for companionship, but I will never do it again. I see these brothers being, I think, abused by some unrealistic standards, financially abused, mentally abused. Do you see, or do you handle someone come to you? Do they talk to you about things like that? How can a man recognize when he's being abused?
That's an interesting rabbit hole to go down. I don't think men are financially abused in the way women are because they're the breadwinner. Okay. But I do think, we're in the middle of a decades long gender war, where we're swinging this pendulum back and forth on various issues. And, I think men and women, to a large extent, we speak a different language because we're wired different. Mm-hmm. And, I think the perception is that in a lot of cases, a woman is seeking a man's money. And, when we think of our hierarchy of needs in terms of just human needs, food, water, security, love, et cetera, and so forth, security is a big driver in relationships, and I think men and women experience that differently, right? So I think a man with status, a man with a good economic situation, signals security in the sense that he can take care of himself, his mate, and women have to think about any children that they bring into the world, right? Yeah. Men don't think like that, right? I have never, I can speak for myself. I've never in my life concerned myself, and I have had I only recently became married, so I had quite the run as the bachelor and quite the dating life. I have never considered what a woman did for a living or how much money she made. That has never mattered to me, and that's not typically how we date. So I think when men look at security, they're looking at how virtuous is a woman. Is she the type that is going to be faithful? Is this someone who is a wise decision for me to invest my resources, my heart, et cetera, and so forth. So I think we see things very differently, right? When we're meeting various needs, because we are not wired the same. But when people talk about it, they're using, it's like my wife speaks Spanish and my native language is English, and we're not understanding each other sometimes.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But I don't, to the original question, I don't think men, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, so there are women that are the breadwinner. Okay. But typically when we see it, we're seeing it, women are mostly affected by that, because when we're talking about traditional type of relationships and staying home and caring for the children, that would be typically a woman. That doesn't mean that never happens to a man.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's get to this. Let's get to the the young ladies, the dating scene. I've raised 2 daughters. I have a granddaughter. Some are listening to this podcast. Some folks are listeners. Oh, here we go. My friend said on Instagram, that's because men really do love unconditionally, and he believes that women love with conditions. Mo, that you guys are about to set my
I don't believe
podcast
that.
On fire.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that.
Yeah, you guys are about to set, but this is why we do what we do. That's why we do what we do. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about that as well. Okay, so they're dating. You said that some of the abusive tendencies begin to show early. Possessiveness, jealousy, they show early on, correct?
No, not always.
No?
Typically,
Okay.
a lot of times it can happen slowly over time. It's often been compared to, the fable of the frog in a pot of boiling water, right? If you were to throw a frog in a pot of boiling water right away, the frog would jump out. But if you threw a frog in a pot of water and you slowly heated it up to boiling, the frog would die in that boiling water. And a lot of times we see, abusive behavior happen after there's some investment by both sides and some control. Maybe they moved in together, particularly after they've had a child. There's a sense that there's a control and there's a real strong link there. And those are real dynamics that do make it harder to leave a situation. So a lot of times, we don't always see overt abusive behavior early on, but I think the subtle signs are usually always there. And I think that, we a lot of people date like they get fast food. They want to date and go through a drive-through and order what they want. They want to have that relationship, and part of dating should be, discovery of who somebody is. Mm-hmm. Because when somebody's the abusive, controlling, the jealous type, they usually have a history of that type of behavior or other antisocial or sociopathic behavior. So, it behooves all young women and all young men to really get to know somebody. And the only way to do that is over time. And the other thing that I like to say is you have to experience adversity together, because you are not who you are during your best behavior. You are who you are when you're under pressure. Pressure, we've got, military forces that do nothing but try to, put people under pressure to see what their character is. And we see people's character when they're experiencing difficult times. We see character in relationships and relationship skills when we're not getting along. If we're disagreeing, how do we disagree? How do we handle disagreements and fights and things like that, which will always come along in any relationship. So those, it's important to take time, and however long, that time needs, till you really know someone.
Yeah. Here's one of the things that I never, you and I have had these conversations before, and we're going to share with the audience today. One of them just got their tails kicked. Let's just say it's the female. She just got her tail whooped. And we get her out of the environment. We get her out, safely get her out. There were times where I know you have went and gotten people out of bad situations. Why do you think they go back?
Sometimes it's lack of resources. And then, other times it's, love is not logical. There's really nothing logical about love. Love is nuanced. It's, they want to believe somebody's going to change. I've never been in an abusive relationship, but I have been in relationships that weren't going anywhere. Right. And that has taught me that this can happen to anyone. Right. You shouldn't be with that person. It's not going anywhere, but you love them. You have feelings for them, and you want to believe that you guys are going to turn the corner and everything's going to be okay. Abusive relationships are not that much different, because there's not somebody on the other end that's just going to say, hey, I'm going to keep doing this to you if you come back. It's usually somebody, I love you. I love you. I love you. I'll never do this again. We'll work it out. We'll make everything okay. So, it's complex.
Do men who abuse women hate women?
I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that. I think men that are, I've never walked in those shoes, right? But I think men that abuse are on a very deep level insecure, feel entitled. Listen, if I'm secure, I don't feel like I have to control everything, right? So if I feel like I have to control something, then there's a lack of security there, right? So I think some of it's insecurity. We talked about how victims may become acculturated, but offenders are acculturated. They may have grown up, and quite often the majority of people that do grow up in abusive environments go on to become victims or offenders themselves. So we can't underestimate their own family background, right? What is their DNA? How are they wired emotionally? Because many psychopathies are, environmental and, genetic. So you're asking a very complex question. So I don't think it's just as simple as saying they hate women.
Have you ever seen an offender in your line of experience, been doing it forever? Have you ever seen an offender change his way?
There are what are known as batterers intervention programs in various court systems and in various communities, and they're funded federally and at the state level. And all the numbers that I have seen are dismal, to the point where I don't understand how these programs get funded, because there's very, very, very little return on investment. So the answer is, listen, can people change? Yes, but people generally change over years and decades, right? And when other things are rooted in your environment, your acculturation, and particularly with respect to your own genetics, you're not going to change your genetics. If you're wired to be a narcissist, chances are you're not going to one day cure yourself of narcissism. You may find a way to better manage it. But, we have a saying in threat management circles, and that is past is prologue. We can't predict what somebody's going to do in the future, but the best predictor is past performance, past behavior.
Yeah.
So very powerful. So, generally speaking, no, they do not change.
And this is why I don't understand why they go back. You just gotta throw hot grits on me one time. I ain't never coming back.
Right. But victims don't understand that. And, hope is a hell of a drug. We hope, when you have feelings for somebody, when you're invested in somebody, you might have children together. Having children together is a tremendous pressure. Think of the pressure, the societal pressure we put on single moms. You're a single mom. It's almost like a scarlet letter. Like you've somehow failed because you're a single mom. So there's a lot of pressure to stay together because of the kids, and maybe give somebody, another chance, and try to work it out just for the children. So, again, there's not an easy, satisfying answer. It's complex, and it's
very
nuanced.
complex. And I'm just putting these questions out here because I know my audience, and I know someone in the audience might be feeling the same way. And I would say, as a man who was once a child, I wouldn't want my mother to stay in an abusive relationship. I'd grow up and say, "Why'd you stay?"
Right.
Or I'd ask my father, "Why'd you stay? You stayed for me. I'm the reason why you kept taking whooping."
Right. Well, but that's easy for you to say because you grew up, and I know this because I know your mother and your father.
Yeah.
You grew up in a loving, intact, healthy family. Not perfect.
I was hard, man. I was hard.
Yeah, you grew up hard. But, and I'm not saying you grew up in a perfect, there's no perfect families.
Right.
But you didn't grow up with that.
Yeah.
That wasn't normal to you. So it's easy for you and I to sit here and say, absolutely not. And by doing that, we're judging, subtly judging those that didn't grow up in those circumstances and don't see it our way.
Yeah.
And that's a journey. That's a journey to, it's not just abuse. I mean, think of all the things that we differ about in these different social and religious issues and political issues that are going on now. And there's so much division. People believe different things for different reasons. It's just not that simple. And, these dynamics are very much the same.
Let's switch gears, man, real quick before we wrap this up. Let's talk about, I see a lot of personal protection. You teach awareness, you teach situational awareness, you do seminars with men and women, boys and girls. You teach situational awareness, you be aware of your surroundings. I see a lot of things now. I see a lot of these non-lethal weapons, whether it be tasers, whether it be the pepper spray, the burner guns, whatever the case may be.
Right.
All of them need training and whatnot. When you're doing a class, and when it comes to protecting your own welfare, maybe my wife is walking the dog in the park. Are there certain tools, non-lethal tools, without saying a name because there's not a sponsor paying me? Are there certain non-lethal tools that you would recommend to some of our men and women? Leaving the office late, getting dark early. What do you suggest? How does one protect themselves?
Well, it starts with situational awareness, and I have a bone to pick with how that is traditionally taught and you actually echoed it. You said, be aware of your surroundings. This general awareness of your surroundings is absolutely worthless. It's what you do with that awareness, right?
Right.
And if we think of our surroundings, there is a ton of information to take in if you want to take that in, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not simply an awareness of our surroundings. It's awareness. It's understanding what we need to be aware of, right? We do need to be aware, but we need to filter, what's coming into us. And as I like to say, true situational awareness is to be able to make reasonable predictions about people and the environment. Okay. So a simple example of doing that, right? We've all looked out the window. Before we go out some days, we want to know what the weather is.
Sure.
And if we see storm clouds, we know we might need an umbrella. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to rain, but we know to grab an umbrella, right? That's a reasonable prediction. It's not a guarantee.
Right.
So if we understand how people move, if we understand when we're vulnerable, we can absolutely make those type of reasonable predictions when we're aware. Now, the other part of this that doesn't get talked about, situational awareness, whether you practice it in a really good way or a negligent way, its sister is situational readiness. It doesn't do me any good to be aware of a threat if I cannot react to that threat.
Gotcha.
Right? That means everyone, absolutely everyone, should have some type of weapon. And you get some pushback against that because, some people are not comfortable with weapons. Well, in every car, and I mean, it's changed a lot in the last couple of years. They keep making cars and trunks smaller and smaller. But in every car is usually some type of tire repair kit, if not a spare tire and a jack, right?
Sure.
You don't expect to get a flat tire, but if you do, you're ready for it.
Right.
I carry a firearm. I may carry other type of weapons. I don't carry that with the expectation that I have to use it. I carry that with the same expectation that I know that I have a good spare tire and a jack in my trunk, so that if I'm somewhere and I get a flat tire, I'm not stranded. Weapons are the same way. Weapons are classic force multipliers. And the reason why weapons are necessary for personal protection is because your typical offender or assailant or predator, they're not looking for a fair fight. The laws that apply on the Serengeti apply the same way, in our communities and our streets. So we don't see gazelles hunting lions or cheetahs. It's the other way around. Sure. And in fact, when we look at the hunting behavior, the predator behavior of a cheetah, he's not looking for the strongest, fastest gazelle. He's usually trying to get a young one or an injured animal. Right? Predators are the same way, because number one, they want to get away with the crime. They want to have success. So they're looking people that may be vulnerable, or they have an advantage. They may have a weapon of their own. They have the advantage of picking the time and the place where they're going to, attempt their victimization. So typically a predator or an attacker is going to have all these advantages over you. So without some type of force multiplier, without some type of equalizer, you're almost guaranteed to be a victim if somebody does target you. So everyone should have a weapon. Back to your original question, yes, there are a number of non-lethal options, right? Two of my favorite are pepper spray and taser. And the reason is that because both can be used at a distance, and distance equals time, right? Distance and time have an intimate relationship. And, if I can engage you from 10 feet rather than, close quarters, then that's better for me. That's better for anyone. So a taser, the typical consumer taser, same technology, but the typical consumer taser has a range of about 15 feet. Okay. Effective range, I'm recommending 12 to 10. Pepper spray, 8 to 10 feet. So we've got that standoff distance where we don't have to engage someone. Okay. Now, I had a young lady, I gave a college lecture the other night, and I had a young lady speak out and said she carries a knife. And I said, okay, that's fine. A knife is a weapon, but a knife is a lethal weapon. And you may not always be in a lethal situation. Right. So, as important as I think weapons are, I think they're mandatory for everybody. It's even more important to understand the law of self-defense and what you're allowed to do or not to do. Just because somebody's trying to victimize you doesn't mean that you are not going to be held, accountable to the standards of law. And if you injure somebody or end up killing somebody, there will definitely be an investigation, and you could be charged with a crime. So weapons are important, but understanding the law is even more important. And then understanding how to effectively use that weapon, of course, training, of course. Cool. The learning curve for pepper spray is very low, and even the learning curve for taser is pretty low. I can teach just about anybody how to safely and effectively use a taser within 2 hours.
Yeah. I love it, man. I love it. Everybody, you guys hear that? You should be carrying some sort of self-defense weapon. As a matter of fact, I like the way Steve said it. What did you call it, Steve? A force multiplier.
Yeah. Yeah.
A force multiplier. Yeah. Now, Steve, we're gonna wrap this up, man. I'm having a great time. You and I could talk all night. How can they find you? Give me, I want your website. I want your email. Maybe someone listening can, I don't know, do you still do seminars? You'll still show up and do some seminars or give some advice, and whether it be they're in some sort of abusive relationship or just want to know how to defend their home, themselves. How can they find you?
So, if you or someone you love is or know is in an abusive situation, our hotline is 833-657 7683. That's 833-657-7683. That's a 24-hour, 7-day a week, 365 day a year number, right? We never close. My email is Stephen with a V, the only way to spell Stephen. Stephen period Dana, D-A-N-A, at protectionfromabuse.org. You can find me on Facebook at Stephen, the bodyguard Dana. And on Instagram, I am the bodyguard.official. And I don't know my TikTok account, but, I do try to put out educational.
Who does? I even have a TikTok. I think we're too old to really know the TikTok. I don't even know how to work my TikTok. You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
Right.
Well, Steve, this has been great, man. Thank you for just adding value to all of the listeners today. And just thank you for doing what you do and putting yourself in harm's way and teaching others how to get themselves out of harm's way, man. You are truly, you're truly a hero, brother. You're a hero.
I appreciate that, but I'd be remiss to not point out that you are on the board of Protection from Abuse. And, I'll close on this. I've been doing this work for, I guess, 8 years now. And in the beginning, when we didn't have the resources we have now, we helped some people. But, in the last 2 years, we've helped over 1,100 people. Wow. And you don't do that without public support. You don't do that without good board members that support and promote the mission. I mean, we've even had people reach out confidentially that go to the church that we worship with. So, it's important. The work cannot be done in a vacuum without support. So I have to thank you for your undying, unflinching, consistent, and fantastic support.
Always, brother. Always, always, always. Duty bound. Guys, you have been listening to the Unstoppable Podcast. You've been watching the Unstoppable Podcast as well. My name is Ralph Graves Jr. I'll see you next time. Let's be unstoppable together. See ya.